Hey y'all, Quabila Jones here, host of the Q Spot podcast. Make sure to be intentional with your words, your thoughts, and your actions. And please subscribe, like, follow, share, and hit the notification bell. With special guest Lorenzo Lewis discussing the Confess Project, Barbershop Therapy. Hey, QB here. Welcome to another edition of the Q Spot Podcast video series. I have another special guest with me. I'm so excited to get this conversation. Mr. Lorenzo Lewis, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for the opportunity again to share a positive message to your viewers and our audience relatively about what's going on with our work. So I'm excited to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
All right, so today we're going to be talking about the Confess Project, and it's basically therapy in the barbershop, if you want to look at it in that sense. And so you have been traveling to barbershops in different cities all across the United States, and I'm not going to give away the details, but I would love for you to share the details. But before we get into the Confess Project, tell people a little bit more about yourself, your background, and then we'll get into what was the vision behind the Confess Project.
Yeah, absolutely. So no, I'm so glad that you asked. So myself, native here of Little Rock, of Arkansas, and again, I like to say a gentleman, that just had a relatively a rough past, but also had a lot of light that showed up in my life in ways that I was really able to take the pain and really tie that to our purpose of what the Confess Project stands for. But since we're really looking internal, I'm really looking at again, I'm a man here out of Little Rock that really had a really not a great shot at life, right? And it starts with incarceration, it starts with childhood trauma, coming from a family background of folks that's incarceration and substance abuse use. My shots at life was just very limited. And so on the grand scheme of that, you think about my trajectory was very dim. I was granted the opportunity after my juvenile release of being incarcerated to work in a juvenile facility. And I did that for about a year. I fell in love with helping people, and particularly helping those that come from marginal backgrounds such as myself. And I started working in the mental health field, did that for about a decade. I realized that our industry, the mental health care system that is truly supposed to support and serve us, particularly people that look like myself, was not really set up to do so. And so I went on a spree to really start to spread mental health through our communities. And it started by just wanting to get out in the community, reach men, reach families. And I had a derail, and the response wasn't as likely as I thought. So I thought about where I grew up with, and that was my aunt's beauty salon. And I can remember going in there daily after school, probably from the ages of 5 to my early teenage years. And that was going there to see those conversations unravel, those connections really be purified in a way that people can really connect through a grooming service for about 30 minutes to 2 hours. In most cases, the ladies there that was coming to get their hair done, sometimes they were there for hours. And so I can remember therapy being done, the village care that's being at an exponential way of really helping folks. And so I took that idea and was really able to go into our barbershops. To date, we've trained 400 barbers in 28 cities to be mental health advocates. It's a very simple framework. We train them how to be great listeners, how to reduce mental health stigma, how to understand the language around mental health, and how to contact professional resources and link people with therapy. That's it, right? They're barbers by trade. They're there to make a living. While doing so, they can be efficient, and it's an opportunity for them to help their community in ways that they probably wouldn't have been able to. So that's what we do. That's what the Confess Project does at large.
Okay. Awesome. I am just astounded by the numbers of barbers that you have been able to interact with, and that have said, okay, I'm down for this. Like, this is something that I'm willing to get on board with. Let's talk about the male aspect of therapy. Because a lot of times men would turn their nose up at like therapy, and so let's talk about what that was like when you were first putting this all together, like some of the feedback you got on that.
Yeah, so let's be honest. Men, particularly Black folk, are not entwined with going to get help. In particular, we got to think historical. we think about the lines of racial oppression and slavery and how they really played into our trust, and they played into how we think about particularly folks that are the more relatively populated in our industries, white folks. And when we think about that and the trust and some of the connectivity of individuals not being able to make that connection, that there in itself can really cause a barrier to access. Let's go a step further. We think about the Tuskegee experiment, right? We think about
Mhm.
the racial trauma that played into what's going on today around vaccinations, right? People
Mhm.
getting vaccinated, the ways that we look at getting help by clinicians and going into a hospital system. And so some of these things that's occurred historically, our families for generations have said, hey, we're not going to see somebody that don't look like us, that don't stay in our house. This has nothing to do with us. We're going to deal with our stuff here. We're going to go to the church. We're going to pray about it. And these have been normal ways. But I also want to really lift up that Black folks have really been making a huge effort in our therapy. I think therapy untraditionally looks different for all of us. We got to think about what our grandmothers and our big mamas have done for us, pray for us, and how our village care of being in barbershops, salons, um, all the way to even gathering at our family functions. What that has done and poised in our spirit, that has been a form of therapy for us, and indirectly. And so I think that we have to reimagine what mental health looks like for everybody, what support looks like for everybody. I think we have to take away the white coat syndrome of how we have to show up with a title and how we have to show up as someone who has went to some prestige university, and understanding that historically our communities have gathered, and have already, developed these skills and tools of strength, right, and resilience. And so I want us to lift that up, but particularly with men, we think about what is have healthy masculinity and unhealthy masculinity, right? We
Mhm.
look at a lot of men, have been raised like myself, growing up to be strong, to be tough, but also being the one who has to bear it all, right? Like being a provider, being the one who has to be able to protect their communities, protect themselves, to not be alienated, to not get their feelings hurt. Men have so much to have to live up to, and so um, when those things are trampled with, when there's issues around that, we tend to, historically not be able to get what we need. And a lot of this, I think, is just what we've seen through our grandfathers and our fathers. They talk about it's the John Henry effect, right? We work
Ooh.
so hard and we get sick and then we die, right? And it's that, I'm not understanding that a lot of this, the stress that we bring on ourselves, we live in this survival tactic of just surviving and being so stressed out. And this truly can impede in our health and our mental health more specifically. So I think that's a lot of, obviously, there's a historical and there's an environmental nature there. There is an emotional connection with a lot of other men. And then there's this macho-ness, right, around the language of not being weak. And obviously, this is something that has really started to impede Black men and their mental health tremendously. And so, really good question. Thanks for that. Hopefully that gives some context to the viewers here that's listening.
Yes. As you were talking more about, masculinity, and I'm a sociologist by degree. And so we touched on a lot of societal's views and influence in gender roles and how we have become gender, or we've allowed ourselves, most of us, and we really take on those roles: male, female, masculine, feminine, boy, girl, whatever, blue, and some take it to the extreme. And so you mentioned about that positive and negative aspects of masculinity and machoism. And I get the sense, I don't visit barbershops because I don't America. So
Yeah,
I get the sense sometimes there's a lot of talk that's unproductive in some barbershops. I guess it depends on the area, time of day, whatever.
yeah,
um,
yeah.
with the Confess Project, are you trying to help also rearrange the type of
Mhm.
discussions that are had in those barbershops? Because there might be some young men coming in who need a business idea or need some
Yeah,
business
yeah, yeah.
information. There might be a young man who's about to be a young parent that's unwed and he needs some advice from the elders. Like there's a variety of things
Yeah.
that pop up, and sometimes you got little babies in the barbershop. They need to hear those locker room conversations, So, can you expound on that aspect?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think like, this is something that has been always asked about how do we pivot, right? How do we pivot the conversation around mental health to talk about fatherhood, to talk about marginalized communities, substance abuse use, incarceration. The list goes on and on. I look at mental health as a part of it's a very huge problem that really breaks down into food and hunger access, medical, incarceration, community violence. It stems from so much, even the psychological aspect. So I look at mental health as such a very broad angle of a conversation. What we've done is really try to be very crystal clear about staying on that topic, but in continuity of having a conversation about getting people to access and support. We have thought about how do we be more resourceful. So I'm really grateful that we have recently gotten grant funding to start to build a resource mobilization unit, whether that's through a digital mobile app form or some type of other resource mechanism, right, that can really support families and people that are coming to the barbershop. So that is something that we're working on. I think what we do really well is really stick to that training component, which lasts a little bit over 60 minutes, right? And it's a very organic training that involves storytelling at the epicenter. It's skills-based, and it really gives some Q&A. Has a demonstration involved. I mean, it's a very interactive approach that I think by far none is probably the best in America. And so, and we're testing that now through our partners at Harvard University in a way to allow people to see that this is an opportunity where communities can truly get what they need, how we can use barbershops as a cornerstone for community care and for village care ultimately, right? Because we're all still building this beloved village and through our communities and through our barbershops. And so that's how we're really at this moment is approaching that. And you're right. We often have individuals that may talk about the political process or may talk about something with child support or may have something going on with maybe they're getting out of a divorce and they're really trying to figure out something with, legal support. Trying to get a business loan because we know that redlining is real with barbers being in a position that's needing the support and capital to continue their barbershops, to continue their well-being of life and their careers. So what we're looking at is long-term is providing a resource mobilization of, not necessarily getting into those components, but how do we really provide those resources? So that's something that we're currently working on. I think in the interim, what we've been able to do is be a connector. Obviously we try to stay in our lane in a way that gives us more poise and continue to let us focus on what we're doing. But I think in the interim is being a connector. We're really grateful. A lot of these barbers, community members we've come by, they do tons of different things. So we're excited to be that connector. And long term, we're excited to build some form of a mobilization product that will be able to help our communities thrive and get the things that they need to have the quality of life that they deserve.
Okay. And I brought all the other stuff up because I used to work in an agency where we served young parents under 21. And we had a fatherhood component. And the male facilitators, they came up with a program. One was Dominoes. That was the name of it. And it stood for something. But the thought process behind it was if you get men interactive in one activity, they will eventually open up about something else that's going on in their life. And so I thought about, okay, well, if men start by having a conversation about one thing, eventually it will lead to, well, bruh, whatever y'all say, this is what's really going on. My old lady, my wife, my children, my job, and so then they'll start spilling, but there has to be this catalyst first to provide that avenue for it. Because most men that I know are not going to just come out and say,
"Oh no, absolutely, yeah,
I'm having XYZ issue." Yeah.
Yes, no, and I totally agree. I think that we are that catalyst, right? In a lot of ways, we come to break that ice, to talk about really hard things. But I want to really take a step back because the people that we hire, the people that we mobilize in our work, the people that we partner with are just as come from marginal backgrounds, right? Or either they are an ally. They are particularly not, in the Black community, or they may not appear to look like us. We're very critical about addressing white supremacy and addressing systemic racism in our work through how we see our funding, how we see the people that we bring in to partner with, how we even approach our partners, right? That may not have as best knowledge. And so I think that we are just as accountable for assuring that we approach this work from that angle. But I think also in addition is that we bring people with lived experiences. So as I came on, I talked about my experiences that I've had to the justice system and to trauma and to hospitalization, even in mental health, being diagnosed with major depression. And so I understand that it's so important that we have people with lived experiences that have that story, to also engage with our barbers and with our community members. Because one core thing about our work is that we really build about building our unifying the Black family, right? And so I think one way to really do that, and when we unify, we have conversations, and probably real hard conversations, about some of the things that you've already listed. And so I think that you're right. This can be a catalyst. And I think it's about, it's about the approach. It's about the framework. And I think we've gotten relatively better than what we used to be about making sure that we're not causing more harm and doing more good for our people and what they deserve.
All right. So as the program project initiative
Yes, yes.
continues to grow, do you foresee possibly a course or so, a few hours incorporated into barbering school courses? And so that way you're now heading them off at the path. Before they get into the barbershop, they're getting something extra. Or maybe it could be just a continuing education type course outside of what they have to do for barbering. Because I know, like, I went to school, but I only had to do like 1,500 hours because I was nail tech. But for cosmetology, it's like thousands of hours. And I'm sure the last thing they want is to tack on more hours to take another class.
Yes. No. So say no more. We do have the Confess Project Barber Coalition, but in addition to that, we have the TC Student Barber Coalition. So we have also trained out of the 400, we've trained probably 100, including that number of barber school students. So we do actively train barber school students. We train here locally in Arkansas barber school students all the way to Kentucky to several barber schools across the United States. Particularly, we do target barbers, but we do target the barber schools. And so that is a relationship that we're continuing to build. We also have a virtual course. So there are barbershops in cities that we can't typically go in due to maybe it's budget restraints, or maybe there's just not an organizing group or someone that can host and bring us there. We also have a digital course that was formatted during COVID-19 as a response to address those barbers that may be mobile or that may work by themselves or that may just want the course. We also have used this course to train other people in communities. So it's on our website on the confessproject.com. There's a free training, that we offer. And it's a way for them to get almost the same experience. Virtual sometimes is not the same for others, but we also give them access. And that's the most important thing. We give them access to this training, give them the know-how. There's a quiz there. They're able to take a smaller an exam to kind of measure what did they learn. And it's self-paced, so they can go into it. They can go back out when they need to finish it. I think it's an ideal way of getting out our message abroad. Our goal is just to train 1,000 barbers. And so that's going to allow us to reach 1 million people. And so we're on our road to 1 million with our partners at Gillette. And so we believe that we want every barber imaginable in our target market to get this access to this course. So we're doing everything we can. Barber schools, barber shops, as well as online self-paced as well.
Okay. Now we have to let people know all barbers are not men. There are
Yes,
some bad
absolutely.
ladies out there.
It is. It is. It is.
So, with that being said, what has okay? I have two questions. So, one, with there being lady barbers, has the reception been met well? Like, okay, when you interact with the male barbers and they interact, uh, what has the reception been like? I guess that's the best way I can ask. Are they welcoming of the ladies in this space and the customers even? They're coming to the barbershop. Are they welcoming of the ladies in
Oh,
this space?
absolutely. Yeah, we have several lady barbers in the network. We actually have one really big ups to Lady the Barber out of Conway, one of our really supreme ambassadors. That's been a really great support here in Arkansas. But to your question, we're very welcoming, in different identities and how barbers show up, even to supporting, our LGBTQ communities, and those barbers, lady barbers. So we, in a lot of ways, I do think the dialogue will look different because of some of the gender and culture aspects. But I think the knowledge is very at scale because we know that we're going to grow very large, right? As we continue to grow, it's a very generalized training for the most part now. As we grow at scale, we do realize we will have certain components that'll be more geared for our Black LGBTQ community, more geared for our lady, but So as I realize, those will be specificity trainings that will have that unique approach. Right now, it's pretty general, and I think again, it still fits the common language that, and the common like our common outcome, right, is to reduce stigma, to change the narrative, and to have the conversation, and also to be able to refer. And I think that's pretty general across the board. As we again continue to grow with our support and our science that we're continuing to put forth, I'm sure that we will start to look at different ways and approaches to really addressing more specific audiences internally inside of Black and brown communities. So and I know, just to throw this out, long term, the Confess Project is looking to do work in the Latino community. A lot of our communities, like we're based in LA and Atlanta, we've been to New York, we've been to Boston. These shops are very cultural, right? Minorities, it's not just Black men, it's not just when we started to see different subgroups of us in different ways. So I know right now we're really supporting our Black men, our Black barbers, but I do know in the coming years we look to be a force around the minority populations, particularly looking at Latino men as we continue to grow all the way to the diaspora, right? And so we have goals to be bigger, and as we grow bigger, we want to continue to tweak the way that we deliver and the way that we approach, even by hiring folks from those communities, right, to address that, to make sure that we're lifting up their prominence and the language and the connectivity. So.
Okay, awesome. The other question I have is geared towards, you mentioned culture. We know there's different cultures when you think of north, south, east, and west. So as you've been traveling, give us some insight into the feedback, the experience, or have you received any pushback, from the south versus the west, the north versus the east, kind of give us a rundown and on what that's been like.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We've literally been to every coast. We've been to some of the largest cities in America, and I think I always tell people we started our work here in the South. I'm super grateful for that. Starting our work in Arkansas was really it was our real test. If we could get barbers here to respond to what we were doing, we know that we were doing something. Particularly when you think about how race and how liberation is set up here in the state across the South. It looks a little different, right? You think about some of the historical pressures that's happened in the South, civil rights era, and the list goes on and on. And when we think about that, we still have to think about the way that our families and communities, because we're still a part of that lineage, right? Like we hadn't that our ancestors are still tied to some of that struggle and that pain that has endured here in the South. So we obviously know that with that in itself, the South has a greater much need, and that's why we're really excited to continue our work here in Arkansas and in Atlanta. And even though I know Atlanta's a little more southeast, but it's still a part of that southern ecosystem. But to your question, when you go out east, Boston, New York, the conversations are a lot different. I think the approach could feel more welcoming, but they also have their own stressors and triggers in their cities. And I think the West Coast in LA, it's again, that's when you start to really talk about, Latinos and blacks and how they all cohabitate in the same spaces, right? And so I think it's an interesting component, and even think about the Midwest. We've been to Chicago where the violence is a very high issue where there that's obviously a lot of other community and city issues that probably should be put more to rest, and not to go too deep into that, but I think every coast that I've went through, I think obviously it's being somebody who's from the South. I think that everybody has their own identity, but I think the relatively one that's always stood out is our groups in Texas, our southern cities, right? And it shows how much we really need to be here. How I'm glad as we pivot, we still kept our southern cities in our radar. That we didn't forget. But let's be honest. California has a lot of mental health concerns across homelessness and housing. So there's a lot of very unique challenges there in the city of LA that probably doesn't exist in many other cities. But then in some cases it does. So I think that this gives us it keeps our job very busy to having to stay abreast of changes, policies, and different things that's going on in these areas. So hopefully that gives you some context. But I think every community it's been a reward to visit and to learn to get better at how we approach these things. So
That's awesome. So we're going to let people know how they can contact you if they would like to get more involved and, show their support for what you're doing and find out how they can be a part of the team in some shape, form, or fashion. Like, this is not a one person thing. This is a community, statewide, global issue. So we need everybody possible to get on board. So let's talk about, as of today through the end of the year, what you possibly have going on, how people can get involved. I just put all the contact information on the screen. So please jot that down. Take a screenshot, pause the video, whatever you need to do, get this information down. But tell us what you have going on, what you can share rather with us.
Absolutely.
You have going on for the rest of the
year. Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm super glad that you asked. The Confess Project is again looking to train 1,000 barbers. If you are a barber school, if you are connected to barbershops, please send them to our website. Our contact. We have a contact form. Somebody will be in contact with them. Also, you can reach out to me directly here at my email that's provided to see how we maybe can partner. I think our biggest outcomes is looking at, again, reaching those barbers. And in addition, I think just continuing to spread the message about what we're doing. I think as people become more familiar, across Arkansas, across other cities, wherever they may be, I think it's a grander outcome, particularly because when people don't know any better, they just don't know. And so we're here to hopefully that the viewers can be our messenger. And if that's sharing anything from our social medias or connecting us, I think is their greatest gift that can be given, so that we can continue to erase stigma and improve the access, and again to change the narrative. It is possible. There is purpose on the other side of everybody's pain, and at the Confess Project, we are dedicated and committed to being a game changer, and not in the aspect of ego, but really to change our community. We feel that, but again, as you said, we feel that this is also everybody's business. So we want to hear from you, hear from anybody here that may have any good ideas. Maybe there's something that we can do better. Please reach out to us, and we would love to see how we can talk more.
All right. Well, I really appreciate you for giving me your time, and I will definitely be social media stalking you and see what y'all got going on next. And what city you, instead of where in the world is Carmen San Diego, where in the world is Lorenzo Lewis?
I know, right? Yeah, no, I'm really grateful and thank you to your show, and the Q Spot for allowing me to share our story and our sentiments. Our team, we're always grateful to, and I represent them. I represent our barbers and our network, and so I'm excited that you allow all of their voices to be heard, other than myself, because I'm also a part of the larger eco of truly bettering our communities and seeing that we have a much more quality emotional and mental health than we had before. So.
All right. Well, thank you so very much. And I hope everyone listening and watching got something out of this. And you took notes, you're taking notes, and you're going to reach out to Mr. Lorenzo and his team and become involved. Be a part of the progress. Be a part of the Confess Project. Thank you for watching the Q Spot podcast video series. Don't forget to join the Q crew so you don't miss a beat. Follow, like, and share on all of my social media platforms, as well as the major podcast platforms. Lastly, be intentional with your words, your thoughts, and your actions.